Alright, welcome to CRJ 151. This week we're taking a look at Chapter 3, which talks about drugs in the news media. And I just want to provide a quick overview of the chapter. Now the chapter talks about the essentialistic perspective of drugs and drug use. And really what that does is looks at what are drugs objectively, and then what social, behavioral, and natural scientists have determined what their qualities and characteristics are, who uses them and why they use them, and with what consequences they use them. Now the contrasting perspective is the constructionist perspective, which looks at drugs and drug use and how it's represented, depicted, seen, judged, talked, and thought about, and even regarded. And we see a lot of that in the news media. Now, the way that drugs and drug use are depicted in the media is really just one aspect of how they're socially constructed. The object of the chapter really is to help you gain understanding about how drug use is portrayed in the news media, what consequences that particular portrayal might have, especially with respect to legislation and laws, and then how it departs from what scientists know about drug use, because there is a disjunction between what the media says and what we know to be true through science and research. Now, the news media's depiction of drug use really is biased in certain ways, both factually and with respect to the angle or the slant that the media selects to tell the drug story. Now, this isn't unique to just drugs. We see this in several different areas, but obviously with the context of what we're talking about, that's going to be our focus in this chapter. Now, there are 4 different theories of media bias that you'll see in the chapter. The first is the ruling elite theory, which really argues that the media presents those in power their view of reality in order to help maintain their status or their influence over other portions of the society. Now, the second one is the money machine theory, which really argues that the media is biased in order to attract the largest possible audiences so that they earn the largest possible profits. The grassroots theory talks about the slant of the media, how it can reflect the bias of people, and then the professional subculture theory talks about the biases of media being the biases of the subculture of journalism. Now, it also looks that it tells a story from a human interest angle, but it really shapes the story with a particular audience in mind. But it's important that when we do that, that's actually accurate in reporting, and that it's verifying the facts. Now, fear and concern about drug use that we see through media attention has really kind of waxed and waned over the years. It kind of reached an all-time peak in the late 1980s when we had the crack cocaine scare. But since then, other stories have really kind of pushed it off the stage. Drug stories essentially are biased in the amount of sensationalism and even exaggeration that they express. And really the level of drug use that's reported can be exaggerated. The number of communities and areas of the country that are affected sometimes exaggerated. And also, when it talks about the particular sectors of society that have been gripped by a drug epidemic is also exaggerated. And sometimes how harmful and addicting a drug has also been exaggerated for the purposes of sensationalism. Now, these types of stories are especially common during times of moral panic. In other words, when fear and concern are expressed out of proportion to the objective threat that a particular drug really poses. And those panics have come and gone in different waves over the past century. We saw marijuana in the 1930s, LSD in the 60s, PCP in the 70s, crack cocaine in the 80s, as I already mentioned, methamphetamine from the 1980s until the 2000s. Now, really the intention of the chapter was to demonstrate that during those periods of moral panic, the media slants the stories to make drug abuse maybe seem more serious than it actually is, maybe more threatening, dangerous, and addicting than it is in real life. Now, this is not to downplay the threat or danger or addictiveness of drugs. Merely to state that when we interpret things through the media, we have to kind of give it second thought and really think about whether or not what they're saying is true. Is it based on facts or not? Now, next week we'll take a look at chapter 4, which talks about, how do we know it's true, which is a great follow-up to this, talking about news media. We're going to look at what are some different methods of research that provide information related to drugs.